I was washing my electric Brumby yesterday and I felt what might have been a little electrical tingle, which is not very good when you're washing your electric car. It's not meant to do that. What I was doing was I was holding on to the chassis like this and I was wiping in here with a cloth. And it was when I went past one of these little bolts and I felt something, and it could have just been a twinge on my finger, but then I went past the same bolt and felt it again. So I decided, no, I think that's electricity, which is not what I want. It shouldn't do that. What these are the mounting hardware for the battery modules, which are inside this battery box here. The battery voltage should not be on those, and even if it was, I shouldn't be able to complete the circuit by touching the chassis, because the chassis is also meant to be isolated from the battery. So I think I have two faults. What I did yesterday was I went straight away and tested the chassis leakage current. I've got another video on how to do that, and I found it was 8 milliamps. Now the spec is 20, I think, not more than 20 milliamps, so it's within spec, but 8 is still a reasonable amount. I think when I first built it, it was less than a tenth of that. So I think it's leaking a little bit somewhere, and maybe what I was feeling was 8 milliamps through there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to test the voltage between these bolts and the chassis and see what I can actually find. I've got it isolated now, so first I'll go and de-isolate it. So I have my voltmeter set to 200 volts. It's a 150 volt DC system. And I'm not leaning on it now. We'll see what happens. Let's see. There's 24 volts difference there. That's not meant to happen. These two bolts here are connected to one of the battery modules. These two here are connected to a different battery module. Ah, that's interesting. So what do we have? 27 volts, minus 27 volts, minus 26 volts. You'd expect them to be the same. I think they're connected internally. Minus 1 volt, minus 131 volts. So I think that might be the one I got the zap off. Minus 4, minus 4, 0, minus 2, and there's 2 modules left over the other side. Minus 2, minus 2, minus 2, minus 2. So I'm guessing that the low voltage ones are fine, all of the 2s and 4s. A bit concerned about this 27 and very concerned about this 130. So I think I might have a short in there somewhere, and possibly in this one as well. I've isolated the battery now. I've got 3 places I can break the pack up, and so that breaks it up into 3 separate packs, 3 separate sections of 50 volts each. The idea being that you shouldn't kill yourself off 50 volts, but you might do off 150 volts. I think I can smell a leaking battery in there, a leaking cell. It's not a good smell. So I can't see anything wrong, anything obviously wrong. So I guess I'll need to take everything apart. This is not the easiest battery box to take apart. This lid is held on, the battery modules are held in via the lid, so I'm going to have to undo each of those. All the bolts around the top, bolts off the side, before I can actually access the battery modules and have a bit better look at them. But once I do, then this whole lid comes off and I can get quite good access in then. So once you've done all the bolts and screws around the back, then you've got to do them from the front as well. So the top of that battery box is right behind here, and I've actually got screws going into the wood from this side, from this firewall here. The reason I've done that, the reason I wanted it so strong, is because that battery box forms part of the containment of the batteries in a crash. And so I was meant to, according to the Australian design laws, I'm meant to restrict battery movement in the case of a crash of 10 Gs in any direction other than forwards. Forwards 20 Gs. So in forwards direction, they're going to come up against this firewall, which is fine. But in reverse, if I was hit from behind and they're going to shoot out backwards, then they'll be pulling against the door on that battery box. And so I need to have the lid very firmly held in place, which also means it's difficult to remove. Oh, this box here, by the way, this is a 240 volt outlet, and it's got a remote control receiver in it. And so I've got a little remote control that I can press, and that will turn this 240 volts on or off. The reason I had this was years ago, I would put a little 240 volt heater in this, and when I was inside in the morning getting ready to go to work, I would press the remote control button, and that would turn the heater on and heat up the car, which was nice. No longer required, so I might even take this opportunity to take it out. Except now I'm looking at it, I've cut a hole in this, so I'm not sure. Maybe I should leave it in there. It's slightly annoying because you hit it every now and then. Not as bad as when the little 240 volt heater fan was on here, that you'd always hit that. Now that the battery box is open, we can see the battery modules, so I thought I might just take you through what's going on here. It's pretty busy. This stuff here is blue string. That's just so that I can pick up each module. So each module, once it's undone, I can pick it up and take it out. They're reasonably heavy. They're about a kilo per cell, aren't they? And there's about 25 cells, I think, in these, or is it 20? and probably about 15 in these. So they're reasonably heavy, 20 kilograms or so. Electrically, here's the, so you can see that one goes down through the floor. That goes to the front, and the other one in front of it also goes to the front. Now there's two battery boxes in the front, so there's a little bit of voltage comes from the front, but then we come here, this is red, so this is the positive end, and it goes through here to the other end of this one, connected through to that one, comes out here, goes into my contactor. So this is the contactor that comes on when I turn the key on, around through here and into this end of this one, and comes out on the same end of this. So it's the other polarity on there, and there to there. Then it comes round and into the isolator. Out of the isolator, into this battery module, over to there, into the next one, out of there, and comes down and goes down through the floor to go to the front. So that's electrically. So you can see that I have the isolation in between various modules. It would be much simpler if I didn't have that isolation, but it's safer with it. The other thing going on here is the BMS, the battery management system. So on top of each group of cells, I've got 4 cells in parallel, and on each group of 4, I have one of these circuits here. So that's the battery, the BMS module. And each of those has a communications. It has 2 wires, such as this red and black one, which goes through to the next cell module. So you can see going down here, not sure if you can see or not, but if you could, each group has a module. The communications goes to the next. And so as a battery module, we have communications going from one battery module to the next one, and then out from the other end over to there, back to there. And so communications comes, I think it was along this direction and then back out there, which is a different direction to the way that they're wired up. And that's just the way it is. It doesn't make any difference with this BMS which way they're wired up. There's another set of connections in there, which you can just see back there. So this Anderson connector here is connecting for the cell warmers. So in Tasmania, we don't really need to cool cells in electric vehicles, but it does help if you can warm them. So we often have below 0 degree Celsius days, so it's nice to keep them warm. So what I've done is inside of each module, in between some of the cells, I've got these the battery warmers in there. There's what do you call that, nichrome wire through there. Now I'm running that off 20 volts. And so what I've done is I've got a bunch of 20 volt laptop power supplies, and I'll run them off the 240 volts, which means that when we're plugged into 240 volts, those battery power supplies produced their 20 volts. I think I said that the right way around. So when we're plugged into 240 volts, we get the battery, the laptop power supplies produce their 20 volts, and that 20 volts goes in through those connectors and heats up the cells within each module. Now I've got, I think it's one power supply for each one, and the laptop power supplies are underneath here. You can see some of the 240 volt wiring here. So they're sitting underneath because they get warm themselves, so the warmth should rise, as well as having the internal nichrome wire in there. There is a lot going on here. The other thing is this bit of foam here to try and stop any wobble that might happen, any shaking that might happen between the cells. There's also this matting for the same reason, and also for a little bit of insulation, so both heat insulation and potentially electrical insulation. These modules are about 25 volts each from memory. There you go, 23.5, which means, so these two were connected together, which means there's about 50 volts across those. 50 volts shouldn't electrocute you, but you never know. It's sort of on the edge. If it does, then it shouldn't do very much to you. But now I've disconnected them, which means it's only 25 each. 25 is definitely safe, which means I'm more than happy to pull that one out now and Doesn't matter if I touch any of the terminals at all, but I will still tape them up because you never know what metal thing you might drop on them, and that can be a bit spectacular. Just doing a quick inspection of these battery modules. This is the one that had the 130 volts on the top, so it was on top of, would have been that. And if you look at the bottom of that threaded rod, it looks a bit yuck. So it looks a bit as if there's been a leak in there, a leak from the cell, from a cell somewhere. So if you look over here, that one's nice and clean. So we'll definitely need to take this battery module apart. It's not a simple task, it takes a while to do. Okay, might as well get those other two modules out now. There we go, all the modules are out. Took me about 3 hours. I thought it might take longer. I've been dreading doing it for probably about a year. About a year ago, I was inspecting the cells and saw a little spot on one of them, and I've been ignoring it up till now. But once I got that little electric shock, then I thought, well, I definitely have to look into it now. Pull it all apart, which means I'm going to be without the car for a little while. Hopefully I can deal with that. This module here, this is the one with the liquid down the bottom. I'll need to pull this apart. My guess is that there's a rubbing in one of the cells and the liquid's coming out there, and that's presumably where my short is as well. So taking that apart is quite a process, so I'll have to take that out on the bench and spend a little time doing that. So I guess that'll be the next video.